And we're live. Okay. Good day, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So we're a Gender 2203 Feminist Theoretical Frameworks group doing a Google Hangout on cyberfeminism, cyberculture, and feminist activism. So we're hoping tonight that we engage with people from around the Caribbean who have knowledge and experience within the field uh, so that we can draw on that knowledge and engage with them in a format that would not be possible without the provision or the medium of cyberspace. So I'm just going to go around and let everybody give themselves a brief introduction. My name is Warren Chalansing. I'm a fourth-year communications and psychology student with a keen interest in gender and development studies. Keisha?
Hi, you can't see me, but I'm Akisha Munsami, and I'm a psychology major, and I'm just doing this feminist framework course, and I'm totally interested in what about cyberfeminism, and yeah, I guess that's it.
Hi, I'm Brittany Ramdeen. I'm a psych student as well. This is my final year, and this gender course is an elective, but actually I find it really interesting. So it kind of making me lean towards gender studies a lot. Yeah, that's about it.
Jen?
You hear me?
Yeah, we are. Could you give yourself a brief introduction, please?
Yes. Hi, good night. I'm Adriana, and I'm a psychology major, sorry, and I'm actually doing gender studies as a minor. And I'm actually not really a feminist per se, but it's pretty interesting. But I'm kind of on the edge about it, so that's it.
Okay, and now our esteemed speakers or guest panelists, Tanya Haynes and Amilka Sanatan, could you please give yourself a brief introduction as well? Tanya, you first.
Good night, everybody. And first of all, thank you for including me in this discussion. My name is Tanya Haynes. I am a founding member of two regional feminist networks, called Red for Gender Justice. You can follow us on Twitter at Red for Gender and also find us on Facebook, WordPress, and Tumblr with the same Red for Gender, and also Catch a Fire Caribbean Feminist Network. I also lecture in gender and development studies, and last year I began to do some research that I presented in Trinidad at the 20th anniversary conference of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies on Caribbean cyberfeminism. So I assume that's why I've been invited, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. And then Luca.
All right, cool. You know what? It's very difficult to be next to Dr. Tanya Haynes, right? And I'm actually going through her bibliography from a PhD thesis to do some research work for my boss. My name is Amilka Sanatan. I'm a graduate student at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and my activist work is around young boys, actually, and what we call the men's movement. And we could kind of discern the men's right movement from the men's movement because we draw a lot from the women's movement. And in my capacity here today, I always do spoken word poetry and music. I'll be a friendly neighborhood Rasta. I hope we could bring some clarity to some concepts and stuff, and hope 1, 2, 3, 4, everybody become feminist by the time we finish, right? So big up Adriana and stuff, halfway feminist, but that's where we just start,
Yeah.
I mean? Cool, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Tanya.
I'm not sure if y'all wanted to start with questions or if you wanted to start with a definition of cyberfeminism and see how that might kind of guide the discussion.
Yeah, well, we do have questions. However, I will take your point and let's start with a discussion on what cyberfeminism really is.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start by giving you kind of verbatim definition of cyberfeminism taken from someone who's done a lot of this work, Susan Passonen, and she says cyberfeminism can be thought of in three distinct ways. So the first one being feminist analyses of human-machine relations, embodiment, gender, and agency in a culture saturated with technology, as well as a critical feminist position for interrogating and intervening in specific technological forms and practices, and as gendered user cultures of information and communication technologies and digital media, their emancipatory uses, as well as the social hierarchies and divisions involved in their production and ubiquitous presence. And I want to suggest that for us, all three understandings and definitions of feminism are important. So yes, we want to know what Caribbean people are doing online in terms of feminist activism, but we also want to think about what a critical feminist position and Caribbean feminist position looks like in terms of new media and technology.
Great. Amilka, any responses to those definitions? What are your thoughts on Caribbean feminist perspectives on, or what is your Caribbean feminist perspective on new media and technology?
Okay, well, I mean, the first thing is that I'll make it abundantly clear that my background is not in cyberfeminism. So, nowhere I pretend to have a little bit more intellectual autonomy in that regard. But in the context of digital media publications, I know I would be able to contribute to some of the work there. And in the many ways that feminist writings, as well as the use of blogs, help make some very important interventions into popular culture debates. And I think in that capacity, I would love to speak to it, in which I would also know Dr. Haynes, very important work with Cold for Gender Justice in terms of the way content engages new groups of feminists and getting young people mobilized in what you call that social media space. But of course, in terms of cyberfeminism, it was also important. Radical feminists also use right questions of technology to address what may have seen as essentialist arguments between men and women. So in vitro fertilization, I know, like for example, some people have discussed was a means addressing, right, the inability for women to become pregnant, right, or the need to always have a man to cohabit, to always have a partner in order to have a child. So technology and feminist questions around the role of it and its way and its participation in human life have always been part of the feminist interrogations with science and technology, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Amilka, you mentioned something about blogging and media.
Mhm.
How would you say those things have changed feminism from over the years, from early to now?
Okay, well, I mean, first, I mean, and I'll give way to Tanya Haynes on this as well. But one of the first things I think needs to be abundantly clear, and I guess that's that critical Caribbean feminist position, that social media is not the magic bullet. You know, oftentimes people
Yeah.
think that a conversation on a blog or a contribution there was the magic bullet to mobilize people, or how many likes determine some type of social transformation. I'm very cautious of that, right? And in terms of the frameworks, in terms of to whom does the internet reach out to, who participates on it, right? Certain people have inclinations to that knowledge. And next issue, which I think might be interesting, is also with the blogging. What we have also is different locales or communities discussing situations which may appear to be global. So sometimes when you read on Nicki Minaj feminism or the Beyonce
Yeah.
feminism, right? That is coming from a particular geography and discourse and racial hierarchies. I want to read about in the Caribbean different. So you can discuss the American understandings of J Lo, right? And a
Yeah.
Barbadian understanding of Alison Hanks, right? And what we call boom boom politics, right? Sometimes when you read about it, and there's a very different context when it comes to understand race and class. So
Right.
that are the two things I'm very cautious about. At the same time, I have seen the ability of blogs to You know, I always say that you can't just end patriarchy, but we could do a lot more to push it back. And blogs have been very much involved with a lot of black feminist writing on looking at
Yeah.
intersectionality as something that is quoted, which is seeing the understanding of race, class, and gender all in one, and critiquing some of that kind of, you know, gender central discussion without discussing issues of race and ethnicity and so on.
That's great.
Cool. But may I ask Tonya a question? You know what I mean? Because she has, I mean, a blog that everybody's fairly turn up and go to, and we have to teach it at any class. So I'll be a disservice to the course outline if I don't discuss it here.
Mhm.
Okay, so in a way, I almost want to go back a bit, and this is my kind of teaching hat that's coming out, and I want to go back a bit before we get to the blogs, right? And also kind of amplify some of the things you already mentioned. But I also want us to think as Caribbean people. When we think about internet penetration, the Caribbean countries with the largest populations have the lowest internet penetration. So if you think of Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba. So before we begin to think, and I agree with you absolutely that internet technology is no magic bullet, especially something like the internet has its origins, very militaristic origins.
Yes,
And
yes.
now you have to think of how even how it's used now is very saturated in consumption and entertainment and kind of large global corporations. Which is
Mm-hmm.
not to say that inside of it, ordinary people like you or me don't find spaces to use the internet strategically and creatively, and that even people on the side of the kind of internet divide don't also make strategic uses of the internet. But I think it's important for us to think about how internet penetration varies and how this promise of the digital that arose in the 90s, as Alondra Nelson, who's another scholar who does a lot of work on this, because if anybody knows me, I'm always sending you to read a lot of stuff. So I'm going to name drop a lot of people that I feel that if you're taking this thing seriously, that you need to go read. And I think Alondra Nelson is one of them. And she's a black feminist scholar, and she talks about how the promise of the digital in the 90s was about how it was supposed to allow us to kind of escape these gendered, racialized bodies, right? So reinscribing a certain understanding of a digital native that was both gendered and race, and that would exclude perhaps all of us here on this call. So this idea that somehow technology would relieve us of race and gender, when, as we know in practice, the digital is not a virtual world. It is
No.
very much coexisting with the quote unquote real. It is very
Yes.
much real for all of us. And so
Yes.
the cleavages along race, along gender, along class, in terms of geography, are
Yes.
very much amplified, magnified, and reflected online. To go back
Yeah.
to the question posed by Adriana about how cyberfeminism might be changing Caribbean feminist organizing, I think it's important not for us to think in terms of this kind of a big shift. So at this earlier this week in Guyana, people were picketing police stations because a police commander said that he tells, girls 13 to 18 that they need to dress properly to avoid rape. And so men and women turned up in front with pickets, with placards written on cardboard. So those kinds of methods are still important. At the same time, though, how do I know about all of these things that are happening? Because Guyanese feminists are going on Facebook and they are posting their pictures and their videos and they're blogging and they're writing about it and they're talking about it. But I want us to think about how, if we accept that the internet is not providing us with this virtual space, but it's a space that is coexisting with the so-called real, that we might not want to think about how it's changing organizing, but how it might allow us to do things that we were already doing, but maybe
Yes.
in some cases a bit better. Maybe we have a
Yes.
bit wider of a reach.
Yes, because wow, that's excellent. I mean, two things that we need to speak to as well is that the idea of Facebook revolutionaries. We also know what we call traditional action and lobbying and advocacy is central to the advancement of those agendas that we have. And like in a status we have always seen does not turn out in terms of the events that we have where we need people to pick it and get involved and to do work. What I believe the internet has done was decentralize communication in a very important way that may have helped change the way that we organize as a group and our organizational structures in doing the same work we need to do. So we also just don't need to write blogs, we need to write letters to the editor and so on, and engaging people in Trinidad and Tobago, people who have internet in households. From what I understand, like at least by 2010, by the ITU, we have 38% internet penetration. Now, mobile, now there's no correlation between how many people have internet because mobile phone technology is well over 100% and internet penetration is in the 90s. So, in terms of, however, access to it, it raises important questions. And also, what I am very cautious of, is this kind of reappropriation of feminism by, not to dog everybody, but, the American pop star sexy feminism, which is the Beyonce's and the Minaj and so on, which all good too, yeah? You know what I mean? Different people could carry the banner and the flag. But we also need to understand there are major inequalities in the contribution of information and content online, whether it be ethnic minorities, whether it be men to women. So Wikipedia is unequal in terms of the contributors, in terms of coding, right? My younger brother actually does a lot of work with that. In terms of the persons who do involve with coding, which is effectively the foundation for our internet platform and not done by brown and black people. And last, what we have is a geographical divide with certain flows of information, which is still North-South or Euro-American coming into Caribbean. And we are using those lenses of really space, which promotes the kind of boardroom liberalism in terms of understanding our gender relations, or even like I was reading last night, establishmentarianism, Babylon thing. You want to move within the establishment and have CSR feminism, corporate social responsibility. And sometimes it's away from those Caribbean traditions, which is always, when did Nicki Minaj and Beyonce tweet about rape? When your feminist work, is it that the feminists, when they go #1,
Yeah.
or they get the Grammys or whatever, like, are we only activists when we're talking about one position or only look at sexual agency? Like the Caribbean have a long tradition of also understanding it as part of historical trajectory and moving into the future. I think, like, where all these feminists from online, do they do women's studies? A women's studies class is oversubscribed.
That's true.
You all do sociology, you're like 200 people inside a day, right? The women studies and sociology is one chapter. So, in terms of the real output, I think there is some consciousness raising that happens, but really want to see some more. I don't believe the offline life is a space with which it erases the value of. So your online life, what happens offline manifests itself online in real ways, and we need to also transform that offline life, contrary to the experiences we have online. Yeah.
Okay, so if I could just jump in here and also introduce you to some other scholars that I think would be useful for helping you think about these questions. So there's a Jamaican scholar, he does a lot of work in Caribbean radical thought called Anthony Bogues, and he talks about an empire of liberty and how specifically the US has kind of co-opted this language of freedom and desire, and as a way to further the neoliberal project. And I find in there as well what you were saying about social media and social media usage and mobile phone technology, and how being part of these media cultures is often represented as the only way of being human in the world at this particular moment in time. It's part of a culture that everybody wants to be a part of. Young people don't want to be left out. And if you look at even Marcia Forbes's work from Jamaica, she does some work interviewing and research on young people in terms of Facebook and social media cultures. And one of the things that students told her was about how that became another index of your poverty or your disenfranchisement, was not having access to things like social media or a Facebook account. So I think we also have to be very wary of how participation in these supposedly global kinds of culture and media flows becomes a kind of a stand-in for this empire of liberty that Anthony Bowles talks about, this representing the neoliberal way of being as the only viable means of being in the world. So something that everybody should be aspiring to. And we don't often think about what are the costs of producing the kinds of technologies that we find to be so crucial. What are, for example, the environmental costs and the labor costs, who's mining the material, the metals that are going into our cell phones. So the importance of thinking very, very critically of that, even as we use the platforms. And we mentioned Facebook a lot. When I started on Code Red in Facebook, I like to consider myself and Code Red to be like Caribbean cyber feminist pioneers, because at least when we started out, we felt like there wasn't any other group trying to do what we were doing online. Now there's a lot of stuff and a lot of really wonderful Caribbean feminist blogs and projects going online. But in a way, we felt like we were pioneering. And at the point in time when we started the Facebook page, if I posted an article, everybody who'd liked my page got the article coming up in their feed. Since Facebook has monetized every aspect of the Facebook experience, that no longer happens. You have to have content that is really, really hot and catching, that really resonates with people, so that they're clicking and they're sharing it. And that's the only way, outside of paying to push content to people, that's the only way to get that done. And sometimes a lot of the feminist stories that we want to share are the stories related to gender inequalities and other kinds of issues facing the Caribbean, are not always the hot, sexy things that people want to constantly click and like. Sometimes a like is not even appropriate depending on the content. So we are so dependent, we are so dependent on platforms that are not of our own making, that we do not own, and that we become, in a way, the kinds of products. And I saw how the interaction dwindled precisely at the moment when Facebook required you to pay to promote each post. That said, if something really resonates with people, it will take off on its own kind of steam. And most recently, there was an article written by a Trinidadian woman about being the dark-skinned sister in a home where her father was, she said he favored lighter sister. And on our page alone, that had like 5,000, about 5,000, a reach of over 5,000 in a short space of time. And so to give you kind of the positive side of this is that I am extremely excited when I see the sheer number of writers, people putting out online diaries and blogs from all kinds of spaces, and the ways in which the social media has opened up opportunities for multiple voices that really did not exist before. I'm not sure, and to see the scholarship that comes out of it, because you also see some very, very critical and fine observations of Caribbean culture coming from people who are not necessarily in the academy.
Most definitely, most definitely. And you know, the diasporic conversations that are made possible, you know, from the Caribbean to the diaspora, diaspora to the Caribbean, I think, you know, it really intensified. But you know, interesting when we talk, you know, the Caribbean, when we talk about social media or the internet, unfortunately, we talk about Facebook, but there's a reason that we only talk about Facebook, because of the potency of the medium and our levels of participation. But like, you know, I was having a conversation with my brother here on privacy settings, you know, and the privacy setting, the amount of clicks you have to do now to protect your privacy is like you're opening a door to a next door in the basement and you have to put on a light, and that is how you get to your privacy. And as well, in terms of the home feeds and in terms of the kind of articles that you receive, you have paid sponsored ads, which I use as well, right? Without shame, you know what I mean? Paid sponsored ads that literally almost invade the profile, and you don't get that type of indigenous content with the same amount of frequency Tony was speaking to. So again, you know, what we have to ask the question, I think a lot of times in the Caribbean, like how the same way we don't know how we drive on the left, there's a system we inherit, and therefore 50% of the population have cars, but you have the wheel on the left, you might have trouble in terms of accidents. We need to understand that what constitutes social, right, is actually a thing that can be defined in different spaces. And Facebook is a certain type of social activity which have a certain origins in Ivy League university and elite practices and building around exclusivity. And now there's certain marketing logic that came to it, which kind of determine, right, or create those terms of reference in the way that we engage and have conversations with each other. And that is very important to understand that social media is not value neutral, but it came out of a very particular situation. And your information, and I want to, and there's something, Warren, you should know that, and I'm sure you know, but you should like tell everyone that when you don't pay to use a service, more than often you are the product. And that is the case that we have with Facebook. And that is why, Kim Kardashian have to break the internet in that way. That I can't break the internet, eating cricks and
Well,
when
to be fair, I don't think she broke the internet. I think that I think that the news of what the original picture is now might be, but that whole concept of breaking the internet is unfathomable to me. The idea that there's this entire space. I like Tanya's point on the statuses we experience in real life being reflected online. But do you, and as well as accessibility to the internet being a major challenge, because as you might know, we're
I can't hear you.
Yeah, mute, Virgin.
sorry. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I started speaking and now I realized that I was uh, trying to reflect the conversation and everything that was happening. I really love you guys' feedback. I really love Tanya's point on the statuses that we experience in our everyday lives and the internet being a reflection of that everyday life in a cyberspace, in a space that could then be shared with other feminists and other people around the Caribbean. So you said, for example, the feminist movements or the movements that are happening in Guyana, you're up to date with it in Barbados. I can see the same thing happening in Trinidad. The article um, of the two black in Trinidad had a reach of over 5,000. But do you think that the internet is really this? We do think about the internet and reaching people a lot in social media contacts within the Caribbean. Um, and it's questionable how effective that reach really is to actually creating social change or actually mobilizing people. Because a lot of the times you'll see that 1,500 people are invited to some march against something, and unless there is some physical incentive to actually be there, unless like Marshall Plan or something, you're not going to get more than 20 people to show up, even though 800 of them RSVP'd and said yes. So how effective do you think social media or the internet is in trying to mobilize people within the Caribbean to create social movements, or do you think that traditional media sources or traditional ways of communicating these messages are still more effective within the region?
I would say, Warren, that I'm sure that when there was no internet and people were inviting people to do things by letter or by telephone or by word of mouth or by pamphlet, that still more people when it promised to show up than actually showed up, right? So I don't know that I would necessarily think that because I have an event and 100 people say that they're coming, and then when I get there, they're 20, that I name this as some kind of a unique problem of our specific age. I'm sure that even if it was a slave rebellion or something, that there were people who said they were in, and then they kind of got cold feet, right? Or people who said they were in, and then they went and informed, right? So let's not kind of invent these as problems kind of created by the internet. But I also think it's important to think of examples of groups that might have started doing something online and move from online to offline action. So I know, for
Yeah,
example, from an example from Trinidad, the Womantra as this really kind of powerful online space. And last year they won a Frida Young Feminist grant and hosted a summer program called Sister to Sister for girls transitioning from primary to secondary school. And you
yeah,
have like Groundation Grenada who are doing really, really exciting things. But there was a point in time when a lot of the stuff that they did was keeping the blog going and a lot of articles writing online, but now they're doing multiple amazing things on the ground in Grenada. So you start wherever you are, which is how movements have always started. So perhaps you might start online writing a blog that's very, very personal. And when I was looking at feminist blogs online, a lot of them, the second most popular of the categories that I created to analyze them was these personal is political blogs, as I call them. So a lot of people are writing their personal lives through a very political lens. And you might start out doing that as an individual, and then you discover this entire community of feminist women and men from the Caribbean living in the region or in the diaspora, and your work might shift and move in other spaces. So I don't want us to think about how somehow online allows for a lazy kind of activism or clicktivism and people aren't really moving, because if we look across, if you look at Mexico right now, people are in the streets demanding to know where are these 43 students who have been disappeared, right? I mentioned Guyana. In Trinidad, as y'all are from there, so I'll use that example. People were in the streets protesting with the highway reroute movement. So it's not just clicktivism, but if that's where you start with a like or with reading something, that's consciousness raising too.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, within as well as that's important. What Tonya was saying in terms of you know, uh, some almost a kind of organic way people progress into organizing as well. If we have an interest in doing more too, but at the same time, I also recognize how not having an online presence, which is very harmful to you in this day and age, it could also work as a way to delegitimize an entire organization or not seen or have people not be seen as valid. So like if you're not on Google, you don't exist. And we have seen real challenges for like rural communities who have very good efforts who have, I mean, high community engagement with their work, but may not have those facilities to have the type of, near impossible, right, conversations that they have online with that same frequency as some of us who grew up in that kind of urban and that kind of urban rural, because in any Caribbean, nobody really urban, in that way. Also, I think Facebook, it allows for a conversation, which could be also harmful. I'm not trying to say like it's a bad thing, like I prophesied in dark days, where it's impossible to have in real time. So you have like 50 people commenting at one point in time and so on. And that is why I think the feminist writing was very good in becoming critical to the day-to-day sexism that we face on Facebook, because to get let the kind of to try and say, well, there's something called feminist blogs here, and then there's something called environmentalist blogs, and Facebook is like, in terms of your home feed, is almost entirely sexist, and it manifests itself in certain ways. So like the memes, the community frog memes, was about African American women, right? The kind of who's in loyal Instagram, the Instagram screenshots is about a certain type of woman and so on. And in Trinidad, when we started indigenize it, it started to be about Indian women making roti, and like, this girl can make my roti right and so on. So, the jokes, the butt of the jokes, is, I mean, fundamentally sexist in experience. And again, that is why I say that the feminist blogs do a lot to push back in many ways,
Yeah.
but also create content. But I don't think the space is also feminist. And I was like, I don't know if Tanya could speak to about that. Do you think like you know, like and that's something I just asking genuinely in terms of a kind of honesty. Is there a kind of feminist space and type of experience that can be made, or like is there a type of feminist performance online on the or at least Facebook we're talking about right now?
I'm not sure if I understand the question
All
about. Are you asking about if feminism becomes almost performative online for some people?
well, no, not necessarily. Is that I feel as if my home feed is bombarded by sexist pictures,
Hmm.
jokes, and tweets. But there's a name possibility to now manage that information of that kind of literature and then create like a safe space online. You know, so yes, we have a page, but your page is also part of your 50 other pages on KFC or vegetarian food and so on, which kind of you always be exposed. So the question I was probably asking, do you feel as if you are always exposed to racist, sexist, these kind of literature, and you can't manage it? You could only unfollow so many posts. You could only do things. You know what I mean?
So I don't know if it is a reflection of. So you asked specifically around the whole Facebook question, but even for
Yeah.
me like on Twitter, maybe
Okay.
it's because of the kind of community that I have created, right? So I don't
Hmm.
feel bombarded by a whole lot of
Yeah.
racism or sexism. Like
My
on my
friends.
feed, I feel bombarded by a whole lot of racism and sexism in that these are things that are happening in the world. So
Hmm.
reading about the comments from the police commander in Guyana telling women to dress better at the same time that there's a Ghanaian MP saying that adulterous women should be stoned, and at the same time that women in Nairobi, Kenya were stripped by men who felt that they were dressed inappropriately, so they physically attacked them and stripped these women naked. So from that point of view, I do feel like we are living in a world that is very racist and sexist and homophobic and very, very much classist, and the colorism and all the other things that we talk about. But in terms of curating my page so that I am not getting a daily dose of other people's kind of sexism, I think I do a very good job of making sure that the content that I see that comes to my feed is things that I appreciate seeing. But I do take the point that perhaps unless you're very intentional about it and also hanging around with a lot of very awesome kind of feminists and queer activists, then maybe you might be feeling like when you go online you are not really in that safe space. And a lot of feminists who are active online get, you know, kind of rape threats and death threats and hate mail and stuff like that. But I've never really been on the receiving end of any of that. I can give you perhaps one joke. When the Angostura came out with that ad about avoid the friend zone, offer her a real drink. Y'all remember that ad,
Yeah,
right?
with the skirt and
Right.
mm,
So I posted it on Code Red and it made its way to one of these subreddits, largely kind of populated, I assume, by like young American white men. And so I started getting all of these comments about, you know, on the blog, which was, and all of this traffic, like a whole set of traffic that we'd never kind of seen before. And all of these comments defending this ad that for me it comes from a particular space and it's coming from a Caribbean space, but apparently, you know, this kind of a man, this patriarchy must be defended even when the ad itself is not hailing you. So all of these young men who would not even be seeing themselves in the advertisement, but somehow felt that this idea of avoiding the friend zone and getting somebody drunk so you could have sex with them, or offering them a really fancy drink so they felt that you were somebody that they should have sex with, was something that resonated with them across oceans. And so I'm getting all of these comments about how, you know, how we're being ridiculous. It has nothing to do with rape culture. This ad is just about just the way life is, that if you offer a woman a nice drink, she would not put you in the friend zone and stuff like that. But what was interesting for me was the who this is coming from, and the pages and pages of discussion on this subreddit from these kind of, you know, young, US based, I assume largely white men. And I was just like, wow, this is interesting that there's this kind of a global reading of what this advertisement means for men and for heteromasculinity. But in terms of getting back to your question about safe spaces online, I do find like being able to be connected to my sisters in Catch a Fire across the different territories and islands of the Caribbean is really, really powerful for me. And it even sustains you when sometimes at home, you know, you're trying to do certain things that are not just really working, or you don't feel like you have the as large a community as you would like, that being connected to them through these online means is, I think, very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with your point, Tanya. I actually really love it. That it does create a sense of community and connection, and so it can form a bit of a safe space. Not to say that the internet is a safe space as well, in general, and you can very much tailor what flows into your social media content. A lot of it, I mean, but not everything can be avoided. I just wanted to go back to Amilka's point that I actually really loved as well, because I didn't think about it, about performativity and feminism through cyberspace. Because if we're looking back at the example of like Beyonce feminism or um, pop feminism, basically, some people call it Tumblr feminism because they say there's all of these angry teenage girls on Tumblr just posting these things that are supposedly feminist, and some of them are arguably feminist in nature or not, or even misandric and misogynistic, but they're claiming that this is what feminism is, and so they project this identity um, to the world of what feminism is, as well as projecting an identity of themselves as feminists. So I would love to hear a bit more of your thoughts on that. And then if Brittany or Adrian or Keisha has questions after, you add on to
Um,
that.
Before
I think
that,
I
I
would
just want to draw reference to the point Tanya was talking about the Angostura ad. I think because of cyberspace, how they show all the memes is the culture that men just expect women supposed to do things for them, and once they be nice to you, you automatically have to give them something in return. And I think it has a lot to do with I think it has a lot to do with how society portrays women as being, and we need to take care of our men and not necessarily expect anything in return because that's what we are supposed to do as women. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of fighting against the idea of what feminists trying to do. Yeah, so I could go on to Warren.
So Warren, if I may take some liberty here and perhaps pose some questions to your colleagues, because I'm very happy to share with you, but I'm also interested to hear from you all about how you use new media and social media and technology and mobile technology, and how you were using it before you came to do your first women's studies, gender studies course, and how your use has changed because you've been doing this course. And the same kind of question we asked around what kind of content is coming through your feed. Do you feel like you are dealing with a whole set of sexist and maybe also racist and classist kind of content? Are you getting primarily content that is coming from US large multinational corporations outside of Trinidad? So just if you could respond to that, like the kind of content you get, but also how you are using the technology.
Okay, I think I can answer it. Oh, sorry, Brittany, did you want to go
I've been
Adriana
going
or
first.
Brittany or let me see her name, Kylie.
there's
Adriana.
yeah.
Adriana, you want to go first and then Brittany?
Yeah, that's okay.
Um, well, for me, as I said, I was coming into this is my first feminist gender course on the whole, and coming into it, could say I was a skeptic. I was the one who had all the kind of negative notions of feminism, the fear of feminisms. I had those fear. But coming into the course, I learned a lot. So because of my skepticism, I can't say I really use the media to promote anything, but now my views have changed. But I have an open mind, I'm an open book. But what I wanted to ask though, because a lot of my friends or people who I talk about it on the issue, people were saying that feminism now is not necessary because we see a different a change in the roles of women in society in the 21st century. In the Caribbean, especially in Trinidad, we have a female prime minister. So I just want to pose a quick question on what you think of that, and why is it still necessary and important today?
Okay, so I'll try to answer this really, really quickly. So I think that
Okay.
definitely for young women of my generation, of your generation, our lives and the opportunities, the outcomes for us are different from say 1-2 generations ago. I definitely, right? So we have seen that change. Some people talk about gains. I don't like to think about it in that sense because things are not one once and for all and forever. So even now you see that feminists are having to fight for certain rights for women, or to just try to hold on to what they have achieved so far. If you think, for example, around things like reproductive rights, but also the fact that we have commanders of police saying things like they're asking 13-year-old girls to dress appropriately, tells us that there's still a lot of work for feminists to do. So the idea that somehow clothing and the way women's dress and that our very embodiment and physicality of women provokes men to rape us tells us that there's still a lot more work for women to do as feminists. We have research from the region that says that for women and men of the same age and level of education, in Barbados, men make 25% more than women of the same age and level of education, and that in Jamaica the gap is 12%. So I could go on and on and on to give you reasons to show that yes, we have to acknowledge how my life is vastly different from, let's say, my grandmother's or my mother's in terms of opportunities and access to things around questions of gender and also of class. But at the same time, you can't assume that because you feel like you're enjoying a certain amount of freedoms right now, that unless you don't fight to maintain them, that there isn't always people hard at work to rid you of them. And in the Caribbean, at least since the late 80s, we've had to deal with the notion that Caribbean women are taking over, that we're doing so well, we've become these kind of super women, and that the ones who are really in need of any kind of redress and attention from the state and the government are actually Caribbean men who are falling behind, right? So that's
I think if it's one thing that I've learned from this course is everybody has different experiences. So whether I may be enjoying my freedom as a woman and my acquaintances may be as well, there's someone out there that isn't. So
exactly.
I think that's important.
I agree with both of you all because we see it on the news. Women, they have to fight to go to school in the eastern part of the world. They're still fighting for education. While we here and we abusing the privilege.
And we also have Caribbean countries that don't have things like universal secondary education, so that around lines of class, not everybody gets access to secondary education that is paid for by the state.
So we have all of these issues of class inequality and race and gender and sexism popping up. I mean, Tanya, when you initially asked that question about, how do we use cyberspace, how do we experience that world, I initially thought, well, I can't think of anything sexist or homophobic or anything that's going to pop up on my feed. I follow things like Human Rights Campaign and even funny homosexual blog sites like Daily Grind and a whole bunch of feminist blogs as well, even on Facebook, and they make up a lot of my friends online are made up from people around the world who just are fighting for some sort of developmental change, especially young people. But the second that I went on Facebook, it took less than a minute of scrolling, and I actually found this photo. It's a meme, right? That says it has the words "When you see Bay," but she doesn't know she's Bay yet. And it's a picture of a woman walking ahead. It looks like a parking lot. She's holding her phone, and there's a man in the background. Well, I have to assume it's a man with a hoodie on and his hands in his pockets and the hood over his head. So it promotes that idea of rape culture and men taking advantage of women all over. And I actually did not think that I would even find that in my own feed. And it was shared by a male friend. Um, but I honestly have to say that my uses of cyberculture, well, my use of the internet has changed drastically. Um, I do use it as a connecting space to talk to people all over the world that I, don't usually. It would be very expensive to connect to them otherwise. Um, right now, I'm actually using it to run a campaign, which I'm not doing a very good job of since I've been sick for the last couple of days. Because I'm running for coordinating ambassador for an organization that's based in London called One Young World, by which I'll be able to coordinate the ambassadors, that is, people who have attended the One Young World Summit in previous years. It's an international youth conference that brings together more youth around the world, or more countries around the world than, well, it's second only to the Olympics. Um, so last year they even had a girl giving a very inspiring speech about her experiences growing up in North Korea. Um, it's a fantastic organization that lets you meet tons of youth all over the world doing fantastic grassroots work as well as work in policy and work with all their organizations, and it's just amazing. Um, yeah, and so I'm running for coordinating ambassador for that organization, uh, coordinating the Caribbean and the Central American region. The ambassadors there, trying to get feedback and connect them to each other more so that the Caribbean gets that kind of recognition. But most of this work takes place online. I see that we're joined by Rachel Espinay. Hi, Rachel. Sorry, I know that you were busy, so I'm really happy that you could join us.
Oh, sorry, I'm late. Leaving
Yeah,
the office late and then Google phone crashing. So yeah, sorry, try my best though.
yeah. So right now we're just giving my group members and I are giving feedback on how we use cyberspace, and how our use of cyberspace has changed. Uh, and we're just having a general discussion about cyberculture and cyberfeminism. So feel free to jump in at any point in time.
Cool. Well, let me just introduce myself to those of you who don't know me. Hi, I'm Rachel Espinay. I am a journalist at Newsday. I very recently graduated with an MSc in Gender Development Studies, and I am an activist, but at the moment I'm a rightivist because I don't have time to do anything else other than write. So that's what I do.
Rachel, could you share with us a bit of the work that you would have been doing before you got so busy with mobilizing and organizing young feminists like yourself?
All right. Well, I'm sure Jake has already explained to you support for change.
No.
He and I and a few other people from UE, we got together and said how our country needs a national gender policy, and we're going to lobby the government for it. It has been a difficult thing to do, especially when you realize the government forces are working against you, as I'm sure every activist does. But we have tried to be a part of a lot of other feminist movements, because there's a big community / movement in Trinidad where there are so many different types of feminists, so many different types of organizations, so many historical types of organizations, and we try our very best to bring our, well, I hate the term youth, but our young perspective in our, yeah, can't get away from the word youth. Those become such a terrible buzzword, it annoys me. But yeah.
Yeah, your energy and unemployment.
Sorry?
Your energy and unemployment. Yeah.
NFG and unemployment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
I wasn't making a point. I was just like adding what make you special about being a youth. Yeah, that was it.
The energy of unemployment. I thought you were saying NFG, and I'm trying to go in my mind thinking, what does that acronym stand for? Yeah, see, the energy of unemployment and free time. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to be an activist when you have a job and have to pay for stuff.
Yeah, but Rich, could you expand on your experiences having tried to mobilize people using online mediums to what could be described as feminist action?
Ooh, I've learned, and this is from personal experience, I'm no Tanya who has studied it, but from personal experience, I've learned that the internet is a very, very interesting and tricky place. You can create a space, but you also have to protect your space. One of the reasons why Support for Change kind of dropped off of the internet scene is because we had a good few, well, for the lack of a better term, internet trolls come on, and we debated among ourselves what to do with it. Should we speak with them? Should we try to, fight with them and get them to understand why it is that we're doing what we're doing? Or should we just ban them? And we agreed that we should speak with them because we're talking to the converted. But that's a problem with the internet. People come on with their own views, their own perspectives, and the protection of a somewhat anonymity. I can never pronounce the word properly because I get tongue-tied. But yeah, they come on anonymously and they can say whatever they want. So you realize that the internet is more of a place to build a community and grow support rather than to convert people to your beliefs, because nobody's going to convert people to nobody. Especially regarding gender. Gender is something that takes a long time to even learn to understand. I've seen people in my classes who probably made it through a bachelor's degree in their master's and are still having a very hard time understanding that gender is learned and not something that is natural and innate. They're having trouble understanding why it is that we must separate the whole idea of what is woman's work and man's work and actually ignore that altogether. So it's impossible to try and convert people on the internet because you just end up banging your head against the wall and banging heads metaphorically with other people. Instead, it's better to build a strong community, to build relationships with people, because you can actually build relationships with people online, and not in the creepy catfish way, but in a actual, real, and genuine way. Get to understand people's stories, why they're here, and you stand a better chance of saying, well, let's meet in X place and talk about this, or we want to lobby people. And even so, I've said it a million times, it is fundamentally hard to get to organize people in real time, in a real space. And it's actually probably even easier to organize people virtually than to have people to go out of their way to go to a certain place to meet you. unless you're really dedicated to it, which you very, very, very rarely find online. And if it is, it's just 1 in 100.
But something I would like to ask Rachel, may I, with
Go
your
ahead.
chairperson Warren, would be that I know I'm sure Warren, but I remember Zaranta, you know what I mean? You all did a lot of activist work outside of the parliament at the Hyatt, with support for change. In terms of what do you think about the potency of, because I have a feeling, because just a feeling, and because this is what I have to try to promote, that you know the Caribbean politics, we are less responsive to that social media pressure. And the social media is also read as a very class group. There's like a group of them over there, you know, discussing that, you know, the kind of West Indian hipsterism and hippies that you still need to organize and mobilize. I mean, in front of the offices and write letters. What do you think about that? Or you saw that the social media operate as a good place to mobilize groups to do that activist work, or that they went hand in hand with each other, or that they were equally effective. Like, what was that? Because I remember you all did really good work with stand up outside of parliament, more than once, you know. You almost had to look crazy, you know. You had to be like the crazy one person waiting for MPs to walk outside of parliament and asking them those important questions, which is your unsexy work, which is your risky one, which is putting your face out there. Like, what do you think about that? Like,
To me or Jake? To Warren?
yeah, uh, I mean, to you,
All
Rachel,
right.
as well.
You bring up some really good points, and it's really the pros and cons on both sides. Because you're absolutely 100% right when you say that it is a certain class of people that you're going to get on social media. And I'm not even talking about social class as much as socioeconomic class. We take for granted that not everybody has their own laptop, and we take for granted that not everybody has internet access. I still have an uncle who has to go to an internet cafe to be able to email me something. Like, those places still exist. So we highly take for granted that not everybody is online, not everybody is on Facebook, and not everybody would care to be political on Facebook. So yes, the bodies do matter, and bodies outside Parliament matters. But then my work in the media, I've learned that it isn't always, you see them, you acknowledge them, but it's never internalized, and they see you as a single entity. I mean, yeah, Sport for Change were out there, and we got braced by politicians, and we argued on politicians, and we had politicians agree and politicians disagree. At the end of the day, what is it, 2 years later, and no national gender policy. 26 years later, no national gender policy. I mean, it takes a lot more than a handful of students to come up and say, hey, give me that. And the institutional backing, we don't have. And I can put a head on a block for that. You'll see the churches, they can mobilize their groups like nothing. The pastor can say, come, let's walk to Parliament, and you will have thousands of people there. Try and get a gender activist to say, come, let's do this. You can't, and then the church works against you. And especially for gender, and especially for the national gender policy, the church has worked against us. And it has been a very upsetting, and, well, from somebody who has to be on both sides, as the activist and as the journalist, very traumatizing and upsetting way, because you see that the politicians don't listen, because they think numbers matter. The more people you have backing you is the more votes I have. So who are these small groups of people? And then my question is, doesn't even matter, because do we have the money? Because we all know it's the financial backers who actually make the political decisions, not the politicians themselves. So there are a slew of factors to consider with your mobilization and which method and which medium is better. And I'm very quickly losing faith in the one person who can change things.
Yeah, well,
But
also,
one person can make a lot of noise and get people to hear. So it's
well, one
that's
problem.
number one and six of other. It really is.
And rice and shit.
Oh yeah, your mic is still on. Um, yeah, just to build on what Rachel said, I totally agree. I mean, she has a lot more experience looking at this from both points of view as the journalist who's covering it for the media, as well as the activist who's standing on the other side of the camera, um, or in front of the camera. So both sides has its pros and its cons. Like for example, Rachel even covered the online petition that it had going around to decriminalize homosexuality that was started by Josh Ryan, and over the space of a week, I think it had about 3,000 signatures, if I'm not mistaken. So online activism does have a space in which it can operate and have a voice. The question of whether you think it is being taken seriously by parliamentarians or people in government, people who are on the ground here. Um, my personal opinion is actually no, that they don't really care unless you manage to get something that is signed by every single person in Trinidad. Um, they're not gonna really give you a second look, and even then they're gonna be like, well, did you fake all the names? Where's everybody's signature? Where's the physical evidence? You know, but I just wanted to make note that we're approaching on the hour and we should be trying to wrap up now as well. So I wanted to ask if Adrian, Akisha, Brittany, if you had any final comments, anything that you really wanted to say, so then we could try to start wrapping up.
I just have one question. This is a quick by the way. Um, I would just want to know what you all think about the whole issue of the feminists talking about Matt Taylor. That's the guy with that talked to the scientists of the Rosetta mission. Like, what do you all think about that? Because there are articles online that says that feminism isn't in the danger of becoming toxic, and feminism is not your friend. What do you all think about that?
Can I go? Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved that article and I absolutely agree. I think that feminists, and not all feminists, and the problem is that people perceive feminists to be in a homogenous group. Each feminist, single individual person has their own view and their own perspective. And each feminist group, each feminist movement, they all have different views and different positions. For those of you who don't know who Matt Taylor is, he's a scientist who did an amazing thing, land a probe on a comet, and he wore a shirt with scantily clad women, not naked, but scantily clad women on it. They've been emphasizing his female friend made it, and he's come under criticism from certain feminist groups. And that's the problem. One, I agree with a lot of people who've been saying that they've been they've been picking on and trivializing certain things. And the article that you've been referring to, they are doing a witch hunt where they're singling in on one specific person instead of going for the source or the root of the problem. So you can bash one person for doing something bad, but take a step back and see why is it we're not taking on the institutions, we're taking on the people. So there's a problem with the whole feminists are becoming toxic. And yes, it is absolutely 100% toxic. This man did an amazing thing, and they brought him to tears. Feminism is a serious PR movement. There are a lot of uninformed women who think that men are evil, and I'm a feminist because I hate men, and that's a major problem. I honestly have been racking my mind on what it is we should do to actually change that perspective. I've even been thinking about writing a column on the different things that feminists have done, the way we've helped babies, the way we've helped old ladies, the way we've gotten daycare. There's so many things that people just don't see going on with feminism. And yes, Tanya, it is bashing. If you heard the people saying it is bashing. And he broke down in tears, and I saw the video and I hated it, and I was so proud of him and I hated it. So they actually emailed him constantly and saying how he is insulting, he is inappropriate, it's a bunch of things. And to me, the shit was tacky, but it's not something to just criticize and beat down on. You can be critical, but not be also aware of people's feelings. And I think as feminists, we have to be very aware of how we make people feel. Because then what? We're no better than the others who try to oppress people. We're just in a different form of oppression. So if feminists are supposed to rise above oppression, we should start thinking a bit more critically and ask, how will this make other people feel? So yeah, feminism there's a sect of it that is very toxic, and that's what everyone is keying in on. Because nobody's talking about a feminist who is in a developing country trying to get clean water to people. Nobody's talking about the feminist who's been bashing down the government, who's been breaking down the government to get free daycare. Nobody's talking about those feminists. They're just talking about the feminists who go on and talk about how much they hate men and how much wrong men have done them. And that's the image everyone sees, which is sad.
And okay.
Sorry, Anko.
No, nothing.
Okay, so if I could just get everyone's last closing comments, we could call it a night. And thank you all for being here. Yeah. So the final thing that I would say is that I do see feminists. I do see where it is that the internet can still be a very masculinist space. So it is that we do need to create the safe space in it, or the safe spaces are created for feminist movements to move, to flourish, you know. In social media, and social media has a lot of potential when it comes to building communities and interacting with people, learning best practices, even learning from people, and moving towards greater goals. That's all I would have to say. And Brittany, do you have any closing words?
I think this was a very insightful discussion, and hopefully people who are looking at it learn from it. And as far as we have come, I think we still have a long way to go to still make people aware of our situation and everyone else's. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. Tanya, Amilka, Rachel. Anyone else?
Cool. Will I go first? No, first thing I just think that you know, I think it would be also useful if Tanya could like rewrite into the thread the books and the pieces of literature that you referred to at the beginning of your chat. You know, I'm also very interested into it. And for the students here involved, you could also check out Suan Barrett at IGDS, and I mean that's a good friend of Warren's as well. And I know that she does it very specifically social media and gender. To look into that. One, just I think there's also a good thing that I'm seeing is that I don't want to say it's Pan-Africanism, but very kind of valuable Pan-African look in terms of we draw a lot of references of experiences of Black people throughout the world on the internet, and I think it's pretty cool. What we should also be cautious is that those models or those terms of reference happen in a particular geography, and we look at it. The internet is highly unequal in terms of producers of content and technology, whether it looks at ethnicity and race, or as it looks at gender, and is also highly classed. And I think that your offline life is also very important, and we see those waves coming in terms of, and even the things, and I guess my last point is that you don't always have to call yourself a feminist to kind of be advocating feminist principles and politics, because some of the things like Superwoman does, right? You know, the chick with the comedy, right? The comedy vlog. You know, it's pretty funny. I don't laugh at all the jokes, but it's pretty funny. And you know, like she challenges a lot of gender ideas and stuff in her work, and really have that kind of Indian diasporic link and vibe happening. So you can also look into that to see if we have, you know, positive contributions by men and women discussing these issues that are very relevant to feminists.
I just want to say something real quick. For all the half feminists like me who have skepticism,
Okay, so
I think
maybe I can give my closing remarks at this point. So one, I can definitely send a follow-up email with kind of very specific references for who I'm reading to help me think through this stuff of what a Caribbean cyber feminist perspective on new media and online technologies look like. Because as much as I am also interested in what Caribbean people do online and the multiple ways in which feminism shows up, so outside of the people who are kind of explicitly feminist and who are feminist activists and using the term, I'm also interested in those blogs and spaces where the blog might be about something else entirely, but then there's a bit of content that reflects a very feminist perspective. Or the way how the young Jamaican men did a video called Real Man Now Rape. Now, it's not that they're doing feminist videos all the time or that they always come together to produce that kind of content, but the importance of the moments when they do, and when people who are not self-identified as feminists do this kind of work, is something that I also find extremely fascinating, and the ways in which it's related to what Patricia Muhammad has called gender consciousness. I'm thinking about how now these conversations about gender equality, there's often the kind of the backlash and the trolling that Rachel spoke about, but also the way in which broad kinds of groups of people are kind of negotiating gender online, and where you do see a gender consciousness and sometimes a feminist consciousness in all different kinds of spaces. So I'll just end there.
Adriana, did you have something to say?
Yeah, parting comments by Adriana.
I don't know if she's still connected. You know, she's been in and out of these conversations. Internet connection is not as strong. Brittany,
So
do you have
Rachel,
anything else?
yeah.
No, I think that was it for me.
Okay. Rachel?
Me? Yes, if it's one thing I didn't say is I think the revolution has been theorized, the revolution has been criticized. I think right now we're in the phase of the revolution will be blogged. So honestly, I think America, the revolution will be blogged now. We're gonna
Or
me,
will not be.
I love writing about feminist issues, and as I try to write it as much as the papers as possible and then copy and paste everything onto my own blog, which I'm doing a horrible job of doing. But I think one of the really most important things that's going on right now is all the articles that are written so simply people can understand it and read and educate. And that's the number one thing, is educating people. You can bash and fight and down whatever you want, but somebody needs to sit down, read, and wrangle with it. So if we can write simply for people to understand and show that we're not a bunch of, then yeah, write about it. Hence why I'm now calling myself a writivist.
If I could just share one, I actually would have a poem with huge apologies to Gil Scott-Heron called "The Revolution Will Not Be Theorized." So I'm not
I read that and loved it.
That I agree that the revolution will be blogged. I'm not so sure that I agree with you on that point.
Well, it's part of the revolution.
Yeah.
Hi, I think Adriana's back.
Oh, Adriana, do you have any final words or comments?
All right.
I think she's gone again. Okay. Well, I think this was a very fruitful discussion. I really would like to thank everyone for being here. Amilcar, Tanya Haynes, Rachel Espine, Emilka Sanatan, I have to see your last name. Yeah. thank you so much for agreeing to be our, well, I guess, online panelists, or cyber panelists, or cyber feminist panel, um, to engage with us and everyone else who's tuned in with the discussion today. And more so than the revolution will be blogged, it might probably be vlogged, video blogged, because I don't think people love to read that much anymore. Yeah, or it might be in memes or gifs on Tumblr sites. So
It already is.
yeah. So thank you all once again for being here tonight. And I do hope that conversations like this continue in the everyday realm, the everyday sphere, whether it be online or in reality. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. So good night.
Bye. It's nice meeting you all.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.